All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your participation. My name is Katie Earle, and I'm the coordinator of the University Express program, and I work for the Erie County Department of Senior Services. And we're joined here virtually today with Linda Drajem and her son, Christopher Drajem, and really happy that they're here. And we'll be talking about the memoir they wrote together. But before we get to their presentation, I'm just going to go over my usual housekeeping because we have some new folks here today. So we are recording this session, and I will try to post it on our website at a later date. Second thing is, for those of you who are brand new, you have joined without your video showing and you're muted and you've done nothing wrong. That's just the settings for our program, so you can't change it, nothing to worry about. And you also might think you're the only person here in attendance with us today, but I promise you there are other people. It's just that Christopher and Linda and I are the only ones who can see the complete list due to anonymous participation mode. So if you have any questions or comments for Linda and Christopher, please type those into our Q&A panel. I think we'll take a couple breaks throughout the presentation or answer them when we can, and at the end we'll have some time for that as well. But type it in so you don't forget. And how do you access that? So if you join from a computer or laptop, chances are that Q&A popped up on the right-hand side of your screen. You may just have to hit that little caret to expand it, and you'll see your text box, and you can send your questions right to me. If you're not seeing that up right now, if you look at the lower right-hand part of your screen, there's a box with a question mark. Click on Q&A, or if you're on a tablet or smartphone, poke or touch your screen. You'll see a box with, or a circle with 3 dots, and then Q&A, and that's where it is. So we hope you participate with us today and enjoy yourself. So I'd like to thank the sponsors of our program, which is my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans for everything they help do to make this program possible. And we at Senior Services are here. If you have questions about programs, services, benefits, anything at all, give us a call. We're at 858-8526. So I will introduce our speakers for today. Linda Drajem is a retired teacher. She taught high school English for over 25 years. After earning a PhD from the University of Buffalo, she taught for 9 years in the English department at Buffalo State College. As a member of a long-standing writing group, she continues to write. She is published in the Buffalo News and some literary journals. At the end of December of 2019, she and her son Christopher published their memoir, and titled, Wandering Close to Home, A Gay Son and His Feminist Mother's Journey to Transform Themselves and Their Family, as you see right there. A teacher at heart, she is a docent at the Birchfield Penny Art Center and a presenter on literary topics at University Express. Notice all of the books behind her. All right, Christopher Drajem is a recent transplant from Seattle to his new home in Philadelphia, where he teaches an online course for pre-service teachers. He and his husband, Patrick, are the proud parents of 2 wonderful teenagers, Isabella and Jordan. Christopher and Linda share their thoughts on parenting, religion, gender, and sexuality on the Drajem Family Writers blog. Thank you both for being here. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
We're going to welcome everybody. Happy you're here. We are going to talk a little bit about our book and start with some readings from the books, just so you get a flavor of what the book is about. And Christopher is going to start.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So we'll trade off reading back and forth, which will give you a pretty good sense of the book itself, which includes different chapters written by each of us and moves back and forth between our various chapters as well. I'll start off reading my introduction to the book, and it starts like this. I feel like you've been gone a long time, and now you're home, and I very much need to know about your journey, even if it was and is painful. I love you very much, and I want to know about your life and share its pain and happiness. Letter from Mom, May 3rd, 1994. In the mid-afternoon of a cold March day in 1994, Mom and I sat in a coffee shop in Buffalo, the city where I was born and raised, and snuggled into our latte, me, and black tea, Mom. I had been living in Seattle since the previous fall, and I had not been home to see my parents since Christmas. Still, Mom and I jumped into a conversation both searing and easy. It was a dramatic turn, and yet just one more intimate conversation between two adults trying to find their way. Over the past few years, we had spent hours in similar talks, discussing new poets we had found and troublesome students, movies we loved, and politicians who drove us crazy. On this particular day, though, I took things in a different direction and said, "Mom, I'm gay." In 1994, the year I came out, people still sent handwritten letters through the United States Postal Service. They arrived days later, especially if they had to travel across the country from Buffalo, New York to Seattle. Dad often typed his, and he was the first to send me a letter, which opened like this. As you might expect, it has been a different week for Mom and me. There are a number of disjointed thoughts running around in my head, and I hope this note makes some sense to you. First, please know that I love you dearly, and your disclosure that you are gay in no way changes or will ever change my love for you. Filled with a sense of relief that I had shared a truth I had held inside for far too long, I cried reading Dad's letter in the dingy basement apartment where I lived. Counted on Mom and Dad's unconditional love, but it was comforting to see the tangible proof there, typed out in black and white. Letters did include some questions and admissions of guilt. They reflect a couple struggling to come to terms with something they never thought too much about, something they never thought they would have to deal with from one of their sons. They discussed books that they had read and the parents and friends of lesbians and gays meeting they had attended. They discussed the happiness they recognized in my life since I had come out and expressed the desire, as Mom put it in one letter, to know the real you and to seek an opportunity to now be comfortable with the lifestyle that suits you. The letters continued, and by the late 1990s, I suggested to Mom that as writers, we should consider sharing our story. That's where I'll stop.
Oh, okay. All right. So we alternate chapters pretty much back and forth, and the letters started our journey of writing. And I thought in the beginning that we would just mostly focus on this issue and Christopher coming out. But then my son and my son-in-law said, well, maybe you need to tell your story too. So I began at the beginning. On the map of New York State, far to the west of Manhattan, there's a city of Buffalo sidestepping the Niagara River. At the northernmost tip of this smaller metropolis, my journey begins. Born in 1942, my mother said I started World War II, and that my sister Judy, with her birth in 1945, ended it. Not true, of course, but Mom was a great storyteller. When I was born, Dad had just been hired at Bell Aircraft to help ship airplanes off to the war. We lived with my grandparents in a neighborhood, Riverside, with stacked two-family homes next to the river. We girls, my sister and I, had lots of rules. Our world on our dead-end street was very circumcised. We could not even ride our bikes off the street or walk to the park a few miles away. Of course, we were not expected to give an opinion or disagree with a grown-up. Such obstreperousness was met with a slap or two. Our home was often filled with family. Even though my mom and my grandmother were not healthy, family dinners marked our lives. Christmas was the biggest celebration. On Christmas Eve, all of us had to attend midnight mass. Grandpa insisted on a big feast. Prior to that, my mother's brothers and their families would attend. Christmas was a time for the men to relax with a glass of Chianti, but for my mom and my grandmother, it was another day of work. Around the dining room table, the men held court, but in the kitchen, it was the women. especially after dinner, washing pan after pan in hot, billowy suds. Powerful were the whispered secrets bubbling over the linen dish towels, used while drying the plain white dishes from Woolworth's Five and Dime. Secrets of pain carried under the cotton aprons. The abortion gone bad, the breast burned by a husband's cigarette in his anger, the abandoned babies and the lost aunts who lived by the docks. We girls imbibed the words as we scraped plates, scrubbed burned bits with Brillo pads, and put sparkling dishes away. Those rumbling stories held such power. Fortunately, books later became a way for me to make sense of these fearful secrets. And I'll stop there.
All right. So I'm going to read one more short excerpt from a chapter later on in the book. This is from the beginning of chapter 16. If you were a gay male living in Seattle in the 1990s, the place to be on a Saturday night was Neighbors, a club on Capitol Hill. Beer was cheap, men stripped off their shirts and showed their gym-toned bodies, and by midnight, everyone was dancing, arms in the air, young and free and alive. I dated a guy who shared a house with another guy who was an aspiring DJ, and during the week, he would retreat to the basement to practice mixing songs. During the day, both went off to office jobs, but on Saturday nights, the three of us often ended up at Neighbors, drinking and dancing. I hated it there. I hated going to the gym, so I didn't have a body to show off. I hated the way I danced. I hated the way men leered at one another. I hated that I didn't feel comfortable leering back. My idea of a great Saturday night was going out to dinner with friends and then going to the movies or a play. One actor I kept seeing on stage was this guy named Patrick Sexton. We met briefly at an audition for a play shortly after I moved to Seattle in 1993. Over the next few years, I saw him in several plays and was always transfixed. I developed a bit of a crush. Patrick had a magnetism and energy on stage that was compelling. I found him devastatingly handsome. In the fall of 1996, I started working as a teaching artist for the Seattle Repertory Theater. At a training workshop, I ran into Patrick, who was also a teaching artist that year. He was kind, engaging, and a great listener, and he laughed at my jokes, a big, hearty, throw-his-head-back laugh that made me swoon. Our first date was on Father's Day in 1997. Neither of us was spending any time with our dads that day. Mine was in Buffalo, probably crying over his grill because neither of his sons was there to celebrate him. And Patrick's father had died of cancer 10 years earlier. Our talk, however, did turn to fatherhood. I'm the oldest of 6 kids plus 2 steps, Patrick said. I don't know how my mom managed because my dad drank a lot and commuted 2 hours each way to work from Long Island to New Jersey. When I have kids, I don't want more than 3. You want to be a dad too? When I came out, my mom made me promise I would have children someday. This is not usually first date conversation, especially not for 2 gay men in 1997. Having children was the farthest thing from the minds of many gay men. Neither of us knew any gay men, single or coupled, who were raising children. But the idea that I had met someone else who wanted children as much as I did was very attractive to me. Patrick laughed his big laugh at all my jokes and made me laugh so much that I didn't want the afternoon to end. After brunch, we went rollerblading, laughing and talking about plays we had recently seen. I was definitely flirting. Once again, on a late spring day, promise and possibility floated in the air.
I'm going to read another short piece, and this is from chapter 13, but I think it's an important chapter. So, coming out for a mom. For my father's 80th birthday on a cold, wintry March day, Christopher was visiting from Seattle. It was so good to have him home. He asked me to go out for a coffee, and of course I agreed quickly. Before he left for Seattle, we used to go out for coffee or tea on occasion and just talk about life. So this seemed like a good way to connect to those earlier times we developed the adult friendship and moved beyond the mother-son conflict of the teen years. Now he was 25 years old, living out his dream of being an actor in Seattle. Around us in the coffee house, people took off their heavy winter coats, raised steaming cups of coffee and tea. The air smelled of damp boots and baking scones. On that Saturday, the restaurant was packed. I even saw some friends that I wanted to introduce Christopher to, but he stopped me and said we had to talk. As we nestled into our cozy booth, I noticed a different feel in the atmosphere. What came next changed everything. Mom, I need to tell you something. Okay, I'm glad we have time to talk with all the stuff going on about Pa's birthday party. I am gay. That was a message I did not expect to hear. I mumbled something about how he must have struggled with this issue. Though I was shaken, we talked in the open way we had developed in the previous year before his move. I was so glad we had developed this ease in communicating. He said he already told his dad and his brother. More importantly, he said he did not want to hide such an important part of himself from us. Best of all, he said we could continue to talk even after he returned to Seattle, and he welcomed my questions and concerns. We slowly made our way out. We stood outside in the cold Buffalo winter and continued talking. Piles of snow rose on the sidewalks. Flakes swirled around our heads. Heedless, we just kept talking. I felt if we just kept talking, it would somehow all feel right. It was then I said I was sad he would not become a dad because I thought he would be a great dad. And I added with emphasis, besides, I want grandchildren. To my surprise, he laughed, actually laughed. Well, maybe it will happen. You'll never know. I have to say, I totally doubted him. But it was a good way to end our conversation. And I'm glad to say I was wrong. I'm dad.
So the book has several photos in it at the start of each chapter from our family. So some of them are here on the screen now, along with a more recent photograph of Mom and I in a coffee shop where we in Buffalo. And maybe this would be a good time if folks have questions about the book itself. We'll talk in just a minute here about the process of writing the book and what that was like. But are there any questions maybe about something that you've heard in one of the sections that we read, or just questions about the book and the content?
Right now I'm seeing a question and a comment. So the first question is for you, Christopher. What brought you out to Seattle?
I was living in Buffalo after I graduated from college. I went to college in Cleveland, Ohio, and moved back to Buffalo after I graduated, and started doing some acting and some teaching. And I felt like for a variety of reasons, I felt like I needed to spread my wings a little bit, and was thinking about maybe moving to New York, but then the prospect of living in New York City and being a struggling actor didn't seem all that exciting. And at the time, Seattle was a sort of up and coming, interesting place to be with lots of great theater happening. So I had a friend who was living there, and I decided to go out there to see what it was like.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. The
Sure.
comment I'm seeing is, even virtually, I can feel the sense of pride and feelings of love and support from you both.
Oh,
Oh, sweet.
uh-huh.
We want to continue. If anything else pops up, we can talk about it at the next break. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had a book launch celebration in Buffalo almost a year ago now. It was December 29th of 2019. Our book had just been published by No Frills Buffalo Publishing. And we received a bunch of boxes of books at my parents' house and had a lovely, well-attended gathering to launch the book, to read some of the sections that you heard today. My brother Mark, there's a photo of Mark and myself and my mom on the screen from the event. Mark led a conversation and a dialogue around the book with some of the folks that were there. And it was quite a joyous celebration. And that moment was more than 10 years in the making. We had started talking about a book many years before then. In fact, probably the starting moment that we can link it to was in May of 1998. I was living in Seattle at the time, and I found a book in a bookstore called Not Like Other Boys, Growing Up Gay, A Mother and Son Look Back. I thought, oh, this would make a really great Mother's Day gift for mom. And so I bought the book. I wrote on the inside cover, "Us Next?" ? And sent it as a gift that May. Mom, do you want to talk about receiving that gift?
Yes. Well, it was a great book. I mean, it was so interesting to hear both the mother and the son's perspective. After Christopher came out, as I said in my piece, and as you can see, books are really important to me. And so after he came out, I first went to the library and got every book I could think of. And then I went to PFLAG, which is a great resource, and they had lots of resources. They had handouts, and they had book suggestions. But I had never seen anything quite like this, where it's both a mother and a son. So so when I received it, I thought the book was interesting, and I have to say that again, I doubt it. I should never doubt my son.
Oh, good.
I was thinking about that today because he's always said, and I'm like, oh no, that can't happen, but it does. uh, so I totally doubt it. I'm like, I was a full-time teacher at the time, and he was. Were you teaching then? I think you were starting to
I
teach.
was just getting ready to go to school to get my teaching certificate and my master's. Yeah.
Right. But I totally doubted that would ever happen. But I said, okay, sure. But it was a great impetus, I would say. And then we had written so many letters. Back in the old days, people actually wrote letters. We had written so many letters that's one of the first things that we said to each other, or I said, well, we got all these letters, we could just throw them together. But you don't do it in a book. You don't throw things together.
That really was where we started off, and we thought, well, because we have all these letters, and they were, many of them were quite lengthy, and we were using it as a way to share our lives, certainly, and to maintain a connection across those many, many miles. And so we thought, well, maybe these letters can be can sort of be the backbone of the book. Maybe we'll find a way to sort of weave those together and to create a book from the letters. And you know, as Mom mentioned, we both had other things going on. Mom's a poet, and she neglected to say that she was actually publishing some books of poetry and publishing in some collections of poetry in addition to teaching, and then teaching at Buff State College. And then I got married and adopted two children. And so our project remained something that we wanted to do together, but it kind of got pushed to the back burner. And flash forward about 10 years, I guess, after that gift of the book, to when we really started to think seriously about it in the summer of 2009. And at that point, we said, you know, if we're really going to turn this into a book, we should probably think about structuring it a little bit more than just these letters, because, you know, the letters were fine, but they also had kind of some other more personal, irrelevantly personal information, like, hey, what did you do yesterday, kind of thing, that wasn't really going to draw in readers. So we decided that we would come up with a list of topics that we wanted to write about, and that we would maybe use the letters as inspiration, but we would each sort of write our own take on these different particular topics. And those topics included gender roles in society, religion. We were both raised Catholic. Distance, so the distance between us physically, and the lack of distance in my family of origin when I grew up in Buffalo. Also, the idea of coming out, the role that parents play for a child, the idea of deciding to parent, and adoption. And we kind of came up with this whole long list and said, well, let's start writing about these different topics. Where we ultimately came in the 10 years of writing the book and getting it out into the world was in many ways a different place than just writing and responding to different themes. We worked with a developmental editor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And that editor really encouraged us to think about our individual stories and those narratives, and telling those narratives in a sequential way. So looking at my mom's growing up, her meeting my dad, becoming a mom, and becoming a feminist, and then becoming a mother-in-law and a grandmother. And then my own childhood growing up, coming out, getting married, and having kids. And so we wrote those stories and looked for ways in which our topics that we had thought about, gender roles, religion, coming out, parenting, how those seeped into our own individual stories, and how those issues related to one another in our individual stories. So that's how the structure kind of grew and changed along the way. Mom, do you want to add to that?
Well, I would just say that well, I think anybody who's tried to write something, you know, as you work through it, things change. And I think that tying it into our stories, our individual stories, helped us a lot. And that was due to the developmental editor, her suggestion that we do that. because it made me think about all the memoirs I've read, and I've presented on memoir at University Express. And I think what draws you into a memoir is the story, the life story of someone. And I know when I meet somebody, I really like to hear their life story or a part of it. So I think she gave us great advice, because we really did. This is really was the beginning. I'm glad Christopher found this, because this is what we started with, and I think it was a good suggestion to skip over to the sequential story of our lives. Even though part of me was saying, well, who wouldn't be interested in that my boring life, but but anyway, it was a great suggestion. And you could talk about that, Christopher, our developmental editor. She was great.
Yeah. We'll talk more about her in a second, but I'm glad that you brought up the books and reading, because during this decade-long period of time when we were writing, we're also reading a lot. And I have always loved reading memoirs as well. I've found them really interesting. And then once we had decided that we wanted to write a memoir and write a collaborative memoir, I started to specifically search out even more memoirs that I had heard about or that I came across. And so we have a few on this slide that were particularly influential. One called At the Broken Places, which was published in 2017 by Mary Collins and Donald Collins, a mother and trans son. I can't see the other part of that. Pick Up the Pieces. There we go. And that was another example of a collaborative memoir that really stood out to us and that we looked to as inspiration, because there aren't a whole lot of collaborative memoirs out there. I was also particularly influenced by Edmund White's novel. He calls it a novel, Boy's Own Story, although there's certainly many elements in that novel that are accurate to Edmund White's own life. So believed to be a memoir, at least in some way. This Boy's Life by Tobias Wolff was another one that I really enjoyed. And Mom, you want to talk about My Life on the Road by Gloria Steinem?
Yes. Well, as I said before, I have read many, many memoirs, and anybody who's attended my memoir class knows that. But Gloria Steinem, she's written several memoirs, but what she inspired me with is that she talked about her mother's illness and her father, well, in this particular book, being on the road all the time and leaving the mother who was suffering from depression, terrible depression, so that Gloria Steinem became her caretaker. And obviously it was far worse than anything I had ever experienced, but it gave me a model of someone who felt free enough to talk about a parent's mental illness, because it was something that I had experienced, as I said, not to that degree at all, but because I felt I had to talk about it a little bit in the book, but it certainly affected my growing up years, both of my sisters and mine. So she was that was very helpful to me, and she talks about it again in this particular book.
Great. Before we get to the discussion of what it means to have a developmental editor as opposed to a copy editor, maybe this will be an appropriate time to take another break and see if there are any questions about this early genesis of the book and how it came about.
Well, we have a comment and a question. The first thing I'm seeing is how lucky you are, Christopher, to have the support you do. Did you end up having children? I hope so.
He did.
Yes, I am lucky to have the kind of support that I have. And the book goes into to this in a lot more detail, but both of my parents were incredibly supportive from very early. It's a challenging experience to come out, and for anyone, I think maybe a little bit less so today than it was back in 1993 and 94, but for some, it's still quite challenging even today.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of perhaps guilt and shame around it, but my parents have been my great heroes and my best cheerleaders for my whole entire life. And well, next to Patrick, you're my best cheerleader. But I do feel very lucky. And yes, Patrick and I, my husband and I, adopted two children, a daughter in 2003 and a son in 2007. So we've got the kids. He didn't get the three that he wanted, but we have two beautiful teenagers.
Yes. Well, you're two dogs. It might make up for.
Yeah.
And I just want to say too that it was easy. I mean, there wasn't a second thought for either of us, my husband or I, Bob and I, about our son. I mean, he's much beloved, and there wasn't not even one flicker of a moment, and he made it easy. I mean, he could have been very, very angry. I know some people whose adult children have been angry, and because he went through a lot. We come from a very staunch Catholic background, and if you know a little bit about Catholicism, you know that it was certainly in earlier times. Well, even recently, I think poor Pope Francis got into a lot of trouble for saying that civil union should be honored. So he went through a lot, and he could have been angry, and I'm sure he was. He said he was, but he didn't exhibit that. He was welcoming. We could ask questions. I mean, finding out something like this, at first I was like, oh, am I saying the right words? Will I offend him if I ask this question? And he never once, said, why did you ask such a dumb question? He welcomed him, and we talked through a lot. And I think, well, that's what we say at the end of the book, that's our message, is that, don't turn people off, but in families, but keep talking. No, darn.
Okay. So,
okay, I'm back. Did I interrupt?
No, you're good.
Okay. The phone rang, and whenever the phone rings, and even though times are challenging, certainly today, people of different political backgrounds in the same family, I'm sure, have many challenges. So, but to keep the lines of communication open.
Yeah. So as our writing effort continued here, and as we started to move in the direction where we had more and more material for the book, we decided at one point that what we needed was some feedback from somebody outside. So my dad read many drafts of the book. My husband read many drafts. And we decided at some point that it was time to get some new eyes. And so we sought out a developmental editor. And there's different kinds of editing that can happen for a book. A developmental edit, and there's a definition on the slide, as its name implies, a developmental edit, also often called a content structural or story edit, focuses on the heart of your story, of the book, the story. You can expect to make significant revisions or even completely overhaul your manuscript during the course of a developmental edit. And that was relatively true for us.
Yeah.
We didn't maybe completely overhaul it, but we did some pretty major changes to it. As we alluded to before, this was the time when we decided that, in working with our developmental editor, that we really needed to tell our story sequentially. Although we had many of the pieces, there was a lot of moving them around and seeing how they fit and how they came together. Our developmental editor was a woman named Jen Hager, and she lives on Bainbridge Island, which is very close to Seattle. She says that she likes to partner with authors on stories that capture something deeply true about human experience. As a developmental editor, I do manuscript assessments on book-length projects, analyzing a work's internal structure, assessing its strengths and weaknesses, and providing insight for revision. I like authors and bring good skills to collaborative work. My editing strengths result in clarity, increased texture, and high reader engagement. And Jen really did help us sort of zero in on what the story was, and how to tell that story as effectively as we could as writers. And one of the things that we focused on during that developmental edit was, as my mom mentioned before, bringing more elements of her story front and center into the book. Originally, we thought of the book as reflecting how my parents and my brother and other members of my family responded to my coming out. And once we got into the developmental edit with Jen, she really suggested that we look at the story as a story of how both of us as individuals who were going through or went through periods of significant change ended up struggling through that change to some extent, but how we ended up helping one another and supporting one another through that change as well. Yeah, Mom, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that as well.
No, yes, you're right. She really pushed us to deepen the story, and she saw something that I guess I didn't see at first, was that we had both made major transitions in our lives, that we started someplace with a family of origin that thought things were going to turn out one way, and as with all families of origin, things don't turn out that way. But how we had both changed, but still held on to a basic belief in our family, and we didn't cut off our families of origin, or in my case, my husband, and Christopher kept us around, and his brother, and so. And I will say, she was very insightful, and she asked great questions, but she also drove me absolutely crazy, because I would be like, oh, I'm so done with this, because you have to write so many drafts. And she said, well, what about this? And she did what a good editor or a good anybody who's helping you with writing does. Well, what was going on at the time? How did you feel? What did you see? What did you hear? I mean, I did those same things as a writing teacher, but I didn't want to always hear it as an author. But she was big help.
That's great. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So once we had our edited manuscript in hand, and a story that we've finally felt comfortable with, and felt like we had this this baby that we were ready to put out into the world, then we started with a quite different step in the process, and that's trying to see if we could find an agent who might represent us and put us in contact with a publisher, or if we could find a publisher ourselves. And we start out that process by writing a query letter. And that, again, there's a definition on the screen. It's introducing yourself and your work to a literary agent or editor with the goal of convincing them that your book is compelling and essentially will make them money, because that's the business that they're in. If they like your query letter, then they'll ask to see more. They might, in the case of a nonfiction book like ours, they'll probably ask to see a book proposal, which was about a 30-page document that included some sections of text, some sample chapters, but talks about who we see as the audience for the book, what other books we think are similar and might be read by other members of our potential audience, how we would go about marketing and publicizing the book, and other different elements like that. So we sent out innumerable query letters to lots of agents and publishers, and like most well-known writers, we got our fair share of rejections. The one that I have on the screen is pretty typical. It said, "Dear Christopher Drajem," and you could kind of tell that it was like the Christopher Drajem was kind of a different font, so it was clear that it was like a form letter. Thank you for letting me review your query. Unfortunately, I don't believe that we are the appropriate agents to represent this material. In this very competitive market, we are simply not enthusiastic enough about our ability to sell this work to offer you representation. We wish you the best of luck placing this successfully. Thank you once again for letting us consider it. Yeah, and once you read that letter and get to that phrase, we are simply not enthusiastic enough, that hits you right in the core. But we're in good company. J.K. Rowling's original manuscript for Harry Potter was rejected by 12 different publishing houses. F. Scott Fitzgerald claims that he had 122 rejection slips before he ever sold a story. And I love Maya Angelou's quote here: "Only one attitude enabled me to move ahead. That attitude said, rejection can simply mean redirection." And that was true for us. We redirected a little bit and decided to attend a writing conference in Seattle in the fall of 2018. And at that writing conference, they have different pitch sessions. And a pitch session is where writers go and meet and talk to agents and publishers for a very short amount of time. In this case, it was 4 minutes per agent or publisher. So you have 4 minutes to introduce your book, talk about a little bit about what is wonderful about the book, and maybe engage in a little bit of back and forth discussion. So I have this image up here of all of these race horses lined up, which is a little bit what the experience was like. We were at a hotel in a conference room, seated in that room with about 50 other writers. And then at some point they opened the conference room doors and everybody rushed down the hallway to the other conference room. And my mom was sort of elbowing people along the way to try to get to the front of the line. And we went into another conference room where I would say about 15 agents and publishers were seated in a long row of tables. And there was some tape marking a spot on the floor, and you had to line up near the agents and publishers who you wanted to meet with. And then you had to stand there absolutely quietly while the other people in line went ahead and had their 4 minutes to talk to those agents and publishers. And the goal of those is you want to get to the end of your 4 minutes and you want to get the golden ticket, which is their card. You want them to give you their card and you want them to say, hey, you know, this sounds pretty interesting. I'd like to see more. So I think it's pretty rare that that a writer would actually get a contract at a session like this. But you definitely want to get your foot in the door and get some more people who are interested. And truth be told, we did have some people who were interested, at least at the pitch. They ultimately were not interested. They're representing us or publishing our work, but it was definitely a fun and exciting and in many ways thrilling part of our journey. Mom, you want to talk about elbowing all those other out of the way?
I know. Other people said in the room said to Christopher, you know, like kind of watch out for your elderly mother. And he said, don't worry about her. She knows how to elbow her way to the front. It was a crazy experience. I've never gone through anything like that. But I mean, you literally have 4 minutes and then they ring a bell. So it's like, you know, it's like a variety show where they have the hook and pull you off. You know, you are literally pushed away if you're still trying to talk to because they had monitors right on either side, kind of gently but firmly pushing people away. And well, we did get some advice. The one agent said, you know, we should change the title, the previous title we had, and that was good advice. But there's a good question. I think I just saw a question. Did you see it? Yeah. Do you need an agent to be published? Was that the question?
Great. You don't need an agent, as it turns out. Sometimes you can go right to a publisher, which we did as well. There are some publishers who will accept what they call unsolicited manuscripts. Other times they will, a publisher might say they only work with agents. They don't want to hear from writers directly. We ended up going with No Frills Buffalo Publishing, which, Mom, you can talk more about this because you knew about No Frills through a friend.
Right. Yes, yes, Christopher said we contacted many agents and many publishers. So a friend of mine published a book locally. Actually, two friends, a colleague at Buffalo State, Tom Reigstad, published a book about Mark Twain, and Evelyn Brady published a book about her relationship with her husband. She was a former nun and he was a former priest. And they were both published by No Frills. So it's a small local publisher. And we had to submit our manuscript first for preview. And they read it and said that they liked it and would publish it. But it's pretty low key. The head of it, a very nice man, young man, he's a high school teacher. They provide layout, they do proof copies, they do all of the ISBN numbers, and they make sure it's on Amazon and Ingram. But PR is nothing. PR and marketing, you have to do your own. So So it's kind of a hybrid, I would say, wouldn't you, Christopher? More of a hybrid publishing.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, mhm.
And what I'd like to say about, about the publishing business in probably the last 5 years, but maybe even the last 10 years too, is that it's pretty difficult to get published by a mainstream publisher. So unless you're Barack or Michelle Obama, or unless you're a celebrity or a well-known established writer, there's not a whole lot of folks who are getting published by the big name publishers. And what's happened with the advent of technology and the ability to publish more things online, lots of people are self-publishing. And we didn't self-publish. No Frills Buffalo is an actual publisher. But as Mom said, they're not doing as many things as a traditional publishing house of 20 years ago might have done. So providing some support to us and taking care of a lot of the logistics, which was wonderful. But leaving a lot of the marketing and PR work up to us.
And I will say he was very responsive. As we made many editing changes. Once you see the proof, you get to see some of the mistakes you made, maybe typos or grammatical errors. And he was very, very helpful with that. He was very willing to do succeeding proofs. So that was great. Oh, you can talk about Reedsy. That was good.
Yeah, I'll just mention Reedsy quickly. This is an online service where you can put out a bid for any number of kinds of support that you might need in the publishing process, like a developmental editor, for example, or a copy editor, or somebody to help you with the layout of your book or the cover design. We worked with somebody on Reedsy who did the cover design for our book, which was really wonderful because it looks really professional, I think, and sort of elevated it. And, lots of people do judge a book by its cover. So we wanted something that was really going to help us stand out. And then our book ended up online on Amazon. As a book for smaller independent bookstores. Third Place Books is in Seattle, and the photo on the right of the screen is our book on the shelf at Talking Leaves in Buffalo. We've got in the on the screen here some guidebooks that we made use of, and some additional resources, including the email address for Mark, who's the publisher at No Frills. It's just mark@nfbpublishing.com. And yeah, I guess I want to be aware of time and see if there's any more questions before we have to wrap up.
I will just add that all of those, like Writer's Digest, Poets and Writers, you can go online and they have lists of agents and publishers, publishing market. You can get a subscription to, and you can see what's being sold, which agents are selling it. So there are a lot of resources out there. But yes, any more questions?
Thank you both. I have time here, so if your schedule allows it, we can continue because I'm seeing a couple questions. You may or may not be seeing them. They may have only come to me. But we have a comment. Thanks so much. Love hearing you both.
Thank you.
Question. Somebody is wondering, how many books have you sold?
Oh.
That's a good question.
You don't have to answer.
We I don't have the exact number. when we did our book launch in Buffalo, we had, what, did we have 100 copies, Mom?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and we sold out that day. And then we the way that our relationship works with our publishers, at the first of each month we get a check based on the royalties, and there's a whole equation for how much we get based per copy. So you keep getting checks. We've gotten a check every month this year. So books keep selling. I don't have the exact number for exact copies, and it requires some math to figure it out based on the royalties. But yeah, we're doing all right.
We what we've done so far is book talks. We did one for Third Place Books in Seattle, where we had Christopher's friends mostly, but other people too. And we've done some local book clubs. And then after or before the book club, that a lot of people purchase the books. So so that's how we've been doing. It's kind of word of mouth. Probably not the best way, but it's working.
Thank you both. Somebody's wondering, would you ever do another writers conference?
I did go to the writers conference the following year, and I actually did pitch the book again to a few more people, and met with the same kind of response from the first time around, which was some extended interest, but nothing too definite. And nothing that was offering a contract. At that point, we were pretty far into working with No Frills anyway. And, aside from the ability to pitch a work, writing conferences, I think, are just good because there's lots of other writers around and you're talking about writing and you're being inspired. And so, I will continue to go to writing conferences for sure.
We got great advice. Well, we were very casual about the pitch. We just thought, oh, we'll just go in and talk about our book, And at lunch, we met these other writers who had already gone through the pitch, and they set us straight. They said, you've got to say right away what you're doing. You've got to convince them immediately. I was at the end of the lunch, I was like, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? But it was exciting. I'm not sorry that we did it.
Thank you both. I know we've touched on this, but how did you do your own PR?
Yeah, we have a website. So we're drajemwriters.com, and we have a Facebook page, and we in the process of putting the finishing touches on the book and getting it ready for publication, we also started to write periodic blog posts that we do through our website. And so we've started to build up our audience that way. And so we've gotten the word out through, traditional sources like the newspaper, and we did some flyers and things like that for our book launch. But we're always thinking and still thinking about the best way to get the word out. And as Mom mentioned, it's a lot of word of mouth, working with book clubs and encouraging those book clubs to talk to other people, friends that they have, other book clubs they might be a part of, to continue to spread the word.
Yeah, we've had great responses from the book clubs. They've been just lovely, but wonderful. And Christopher did all the web work. I don't know anything about that. So, and he made some really nice additions to the blog. So they're all out there still, right?
Yeah.
In Webland. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Very deep. Thank you. I just have a couple more things here, if that's okay with you. Just be mindful of your time.
Oh,
We have a
okay.
comment. Thank you. Very informative. We have another comment. Very interesting journey to publishing. Thanks for sharing. Linda is oozing joy and pride.
Yes, she is.
For sure.
I echo that one. Question: does NFB consider poetry manuscript?
I'm not sure, but it would be a worthwhile question to send Mark an email. I would go on the website and see what other books he's published.
Mm.
I think he has published poetry, but I'm not 100% sure. He's a very fine person, and he tries. His goal is to support local writers. So I would say send him an email, and that would be the best way of finding out.
Okay, thank you, Linda. The next and last question that I'm seeing is, what was the writing process like for you both emotionally?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Yeah, it was there were lots and ups and downs, I think, throughout the process. Certainly we were driven to tell our story. We felt like we had a story to tell, and one that would resonate with readers. And there's a certain, for me anyway, there's a certain joy that came about in writing about an experience, even if that experience might have been difficult or might have been a story that I never thought that I would tell anyone ever in my whole life. But the joy and the satisfaction of having committed that story to words and to make it come alive in a way that I felt good about was it was a real high, I guess, in a way. It was a writer's high. And then there were a lot of things that were really difficult to write about, and writing in particular in one chapter about some of the anger and frustration that I had both with the Catholic Church and with my parents and with my family, and that was really hard. It was hard to be that honest, both with myself and to admit that, yeah, there was anger there. And then to know that the first person who I was going to have read that was a person who my anger was directed towards was frightening as well. So yeah, so for me, highs and lows.
It was really hard to read what Christopher wrote about his struggles growing up. I had gone through, after he came out, that was my biggest feeling, my biggest response was grieving for what a loss of what I thought our life was and of what I thought would happen, and guilt, tremendous guilt that here was a person I loved so much and wanted to take care of and wanted to grow. And I think every parent probably goes through that. And so that was very, very painful. But I thought it was important. And I was glad, I was proud of him too. Proud of him for being so honest and proud of what a good writer he is. So, so I guess when I encouraged him to read when he was a kid, I did something right. And I encouraged him to keep a journal. So it was highs and lows. I was very proud of him, and I was proud that we've done it, that we persevered. Not always easy, but it was rewarding.
All right. Well, thank you both. I'm not seeing anything else here. I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us and being so open with us. We learn never to underestimate ourselves today or anybody else because it can happen. So thank you. And to everybody who's on, we appreciate your time. This concludes the presentation. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and take care.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for
Thank you,
hosting.
Katie.
You did a great job.
Bye.
Bye-bye.